Hi, everyone. Welcome to our Inspiring Leadership Spotlight. My name is Zach Jaffe, and I'm a community manager here at Inspiring Leadership. Very excited today, welcoming Kate Andison and David Ryan today to speak with us about business acumen, the secret to successful business leadership. For those who are attending live right now, you're muted, but if you have any questions throughout, if any of our presenters are asking you, we can unmute you or we can take any questions through the chat. And you can definitely chat throughout it if you have questions that pop up. If you're watching this recording, thanks so much for taking a look at it. And just know that we have other leadership spotlights recorded throughout the year. And you can go back and look at them through our topics section on Inspiring Leadership or our YouTube channel. So thanks again for joining us. Kate Anderson is a leadership and learning specialist, coach, registered psychologist, and OD practitioner with almost 2 decades of experience, working across industries in both consulting and in-house roles in Australia, UK, Europe, Asia, and the US. Her passion is supporting individuals and organizations to change using levers of leadership, culture, engagement, and performance. Thanks so much for joining us, Kate. And also with her will be David Ryan. David is the co-founder and managing partner of ACE. He has worked as a chair, director, CEO, advisor, and executive coach across industries over the past 20 years with the list of global and national clients, including listed clients, private equity backed, and not-for-profits. And he is the co-author of the Business Acumen Gauge, a fellow of the IOC, and maintains a curiosity for continual learning. Thanks again, David, for joining us as well. All right, I will hand it off to them and enjoy. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Zach. I'm just going to share my screen, which is not working. Can you see my screen?
Yeah, but
yes.
Not the.
No.
Oh,
there we go.
There we go.
Yeah, great. So thank you everybody for joining us today. Before we get started, I need to just make a quick observation / apology. And that is I am currently in the middle of moving house, which is always a fun thing to do in the lead up to Christmas. And so I am shoved into my children's toy room, which is boxes to the back, half thrown out things over this side, and I can't get my filters to work on my Zoom. So you will be seeing my state of disarray in mid-house move behind me, but hopefully you can focus on my words and not the background, and also just lend a bit of kind of sympathy for me, I think, for the fact that I am moving at this time in the year. So I just wanted to put that out there first. So before we get started, David and I are obviously very excited for you to be here today and for us to have the opportunity to talk to you about business acumen and how to develop business acumen in your organisation. We will include in this a lot of the research actually that David has based the Business Acumen Gauge on, which has come through Monash University, including talking to the final paper that was released just this year, so it's fairly hot off the press. So we'll talk to that. Zach's obviously introduced me, but just another quick introduction. My name is Kate Andison. I'm a learning specialist, a leadership specialist with years of experience across industry, across the globe. And I'm really passionate about how we can use business acumen along with many other tools that we have to support our leaders and our organisations to grow and actually deliver successfully. So that's me. The format of our presentation today will be somewhere between sort of 30 to 45 minutes of us talking. But please do, if you have any questions as you go, you can use the chat functionality or raise your hand and we can unmute you. We're very happy to take questions as we go, or park the questions and we'll come back to them at the end of the presentation when we have time for a discussion as well. So that's how we will be running today. As Zach mentioned, today I have with me David Ryan. David's the co-founder and managing partner of ACE. And I'm going to ask David, who is also the co-author of the Business Acumen Gauge, to provide a bit of a brief overview of the Business Acumen Gauge, and then I'll talk to you about the key elements and learnings about business acumen, why it's critical to our organisations and leaders, and what we can do about developing it. So, David, I'm going to hand over to you if that's okay.
Yes, thank you. Hello, everyone. I'll speak slowly so my Australian accent is not too confusing. The Business Acumen Gauge started around 2010, 11. I was actually at that time the chair and CEO of a company in a turnaround situation. And one of my peers who I'd done a lot of executive coaching work with contacted me to ask me if I could work with him on investigating business acumen. And we had a number of discussions and came to the realization that many of our clients, both the ones we advise on strategy and restructuring and the ones we coach, used the term, but it often meant something different. And that intrigued us. So we commenced the process of research. We engaged some specialists in that area. And in the short story, sometime they produced a paper which identified the term, that it had a multitude of interpretations. It was listed thousands of times in academia and in business, competency frameworks, others, but there was no commonality. We thought that was interesting, so we pursued it a bit more, and then over a period of a couple of years, we developed the model of business acumen, which you'll see later in the presentation. And at the time, we had two purposes. One was to identify something we thought was important that would assist us, and secondly, to add to the body of knowledge. So one of our strategic goals is always to have independent research done on this work. In the middle of all that, we realised not only was there no definition, there was no assessment. So we thought that seemed like a good idea. So we spent a bit more time and more money that we didn't have, and ended up with both the definition, the model, and the assessment, the Business Acumen Gauge. And then it was launched into the market in around 2013, and it's been out working in the market since, globally across industries. In 2017, we were successful in getting a research opportunity after a couple of years of speaking with a number of universities globally, none of whom felt that business acumen was worth looking at, as they didn't believe it had anything to do with leadership or strategy, which is entertaining. And we started the research with Monash University in 2017-18. It was impacted a bit by COVID. The first phase finished in the middle of this year, and the final paper's been presented. I'll hand back to Kate, and we'll now work through that process for you and some of the outcomes. Thanks, Kate.
Thanks, David. So one of the things that I think is important that came through in the research is that often people with business acumen often don't know why others don't have it. Or they don't know how to think about it or describe it outside of what they do well. So it's a very kind of individually, functionally based activities or outcomes. And in fact, the definition of business acumen they use is often reflecting their personal views or the biases of how they are describing it. So what has made them successful or helped them get to where they are, rather than the capabilities that are required that we now have validated through the definition and research on business acumen. So there's a lot of subjectivity that has come through historically in how we've defined business acumen. And a lot of it has been based on quite outdated assumptions, particularly that you need to have, so it's either an innately it's an innate skill that you're born with, or that it is something that you gather by experience. So what we know from the research is that is actually incorrect. So research and experience is actually a really important part of it, but it is not the only part. And it is also really important to develop targeted and very clear and structured specific business acumen capabilities across all levels of the organisation. So I think that's a really important point to think about, because right now I'm sure we all in our organisations and the clients that we work with talk about assessing business acumen in the context of performance and promotion, recruiting, assessing the needs of our leaders, and so forth. But our assumptions are often based on outdated information on how we're actually assessing that. So that's a really important point for us to remember. But right now, I'm going to ask you to just take a moment and write down or think or write in the chat for those of you who are online, what are your experiences and understanding of business acumen? So I just want you to ponder on that for a moment and just kind of take a note of the immediate thoughts and responses that come into your mind. So what are your experiences and understanding of business acumen? So if there is anybody on the line now who would like to share, please let the host know and we will take those comments now. But otherwise, David and I will share some of the things that we do often hear around this. And we often hear business acumen referred to as financial acumen, as David mentioned, or commercial acumen or strategic thinking. Sorry, David, you were going to say something.
No, not at all. Just
You're
breathing.
highlighted. Yeah, you're highlighted on my screen. So we often hear that it is called a number of different things, often functionally specific. We hear that it's important, but we also hear is that there is not a clear way that people measure or assess this in their organisations. And often it is linked to some other capability that we kind of slowly link to.
So we've actually got a comment that says a strong sense of how business works around you, which is a really good overarching comment, because the quintessential question is, how does the business work around you? How do you see and understand that? And how do others engage in that as well? And that's at the heart of what we'll be talking about as we go forward.
Yeah, that's a really good, an insightful comment. Thank you. I think what is clear is that we intuitively know that business acumen, whatever we call it, is important. In some way, it exists and needs to exist within our organisations. But I think what has become really clear is it has not been well defined historically, and the way that we identify and assess it has not been well structured because of that, which is why we're here today. So what is business acumen then? If it's been poorly defined in the past and based on outdated assumptions, what is it? How do we define it? And what we know from the research, and this has now been validated several times, is that is actually a number of capabilities that make up kind of a complex view of how we leverage our skills and capabilities to deliver the strategic objectives of our organisation. And that it is really critical to understand what is required in a specific role, in a specific moment, in a specific organisation, to really understand the needs of business acumen and which capabilities are most important in the combination of capabilities at any one time, and to understand how to identify how people are demonstrating that. So it is quite simple in one way, but also there is a complexity to it that I think probably canvasses why we all have sort of different opinions. And what is now great from this research and from the Business Acumen Gauge, we have a way to really measure that and to make sense of it in a way that enables us to deliver and grow it in our organisations in a really targeted way. So another question for you to ponder on: where do you think business acumen needs to be or needs to show up in your organisation? I'm going to pause and give you another moment there. And again, if anybody would like to share in the chat, please do. So when we think about historically where it needs to show up in our organisations, we almost always say in our leaders, which is true. We need our leaders to have business acumen. There is no doubt about it. We also need to see it show up, or elements of business acumen to show up across the organisation through our talent in areas that are really critical to growth and areas that are going to feed into our leadership structures, because it requires structured and careful development through the levels of the organisation for business acumen to be really present and agile in the way that we can use it in our leadership roles. So that is another really important point to think about it. The question, why don't you see it there, I think is it's a useful one to reflect on in everybody's individual organisations. So what is it, if we're not seeing business acumen in the areas that we think we need it, nor are we seeing it kind of filter into our feeder roles up into the organisation, why not? And David, I might hand over to you there to talk a little bit about that, because you gave me a great example the other day, or a great summary, if you like, about why we don't see it in some parts of the organisation, despite a focus sometimes on business acumen.
Okay, thanks, Kate. So if I go back over what Kate's spoken about so far, as with most competencies, there is an assumption often about what you expect someone to have based on where they've come from and what they have done and what you believe to be their innate skill sets. And there's always a filter or bias that we come from about what we believe we do is normal, and we often don't understand how much of what we do has a depth to it that we don't recognize because it's what we just do. And why I say that is that actually earlier this week, we engaged a new client who is the executive chairman and sole owner of a $1.5 billion family office private equity fund. And he's engaged us to do work with him personally to help him be a better leader and business leader, and also his people. And in the conversation, he was describing one of his key people who manages one of their major portfolios, and he's perplexed. He was perplexed and somewhat frustrated that this person's inability to understand the broader aspects of the risks and opportunities in their portfolio, despite being very good at his role. And he and I had a chat, and I talked to him about business acumen and started to fill out the capabilities. And I talked specifically around broad scanning, which we'll talk about later. And as I described it, this person, who is obviously a very successful businessman, said to me, "That's exactly what I've been trying to explain to this guy, but I just didn't know what to call it or how to talk to it." And that comment is what we hear so often, in that often people know what it is in a sense, but can't describe it in a way that others can understand it and engage with it. And also for them, there's an amount of insight required about what it actually is for them and how they've got to that point as well. And so for this particular client, we're now working with him on aspects of broad scanning, how he does it, how he explains that to his people, how they can respond, and how that impacts on the opportunities the business is dealing with on a daily and longer horizon basis.
Thanks, David. I think the reason I threw to you then, because I think that is such a good example and really highlights what we often hear in organisations, that there is something that is not working and we haven't been able to put our fingers on it. And my view is, and working with the leaders that I work with, having the kind of nuanced definition and validated definition of business acumen has actually really helped that significantly. So thank you. So can it be learnt then? And I think we wouldn't be here today if the answer to that was no. So yes, it can be learnt. And the way that it can be learnt is very specific. So we need to understand what the role that an individual is in requires. So how is that role successful, and how does that role help deliver value to the organisation? How does it deliver on the strategic objectives of the organisation? That is number one. So we need to then be able to develop business acumen from experience through those capabilities that are relevant for a role or a future role potentially, and it has to be able to be identified. So we have to be able to observe it in somebody. So therefore it has to be part of a structured program that we can continue to come back to and say, have we seen the behaviours or the capabilities that we need? How are these different capabilities that we're saying are important for this role working together in order to deliver value and the strategic intent of the role? So it is about being very structured and considered in the way that we assess business acumen. And that means that we have to really be able to understand it and work towards growing that at different points in our organisation. So it can absolutely be developed, which is obviously good news for most of us on this webinar, because I think we're here because it's about developing and improving people and organisations. And that can be done through individual coaching, individual sessions, individual work, but it can also be done through broader organisation-wide or leadership-wide programs once we really understand what elements of business acumen are critical for our organisation at that specific time. So I might hand over to David again to talk to point 3.
Certainly. And in fact, we just had a very good comment in the chat function, which I've answered, that said organisations often ask for candor and observations, but don't generally appreciate it when we get it. It impedes a good cycle of feedback and response. So I can see you laughing there, Kate.
Yeah.
And my answer is very true. Having an objective data-based information set helps to address this. Also, the ability to visualize what it looks like is a major part. And so using that as a segue into this, I think, and I'll make some comments, I'm not sure who's on this call, or who may see it later, but many of you are involved in coaching and development, et cetera, et cetera. So I won't assume to tell you how to break the eggs and make the omelette, but a couple of points I'd make is that one of the problems with assessments is that often assessments are used in a heavy-handed manner. They're not actually appropriate for what's trying to be achieved and the outcome that people are trying to move towards. It's the assessments we always use, or it's what we're most comfortable with rather than what's most appropriate. And in fact, we champion the BAG, we base our business around it, but we do use other assessments sometimes that are more appropriate. And so many of them become tools, as in EI, we use the Mesquite, and the Mesquite is a wonderful tool to help address a number of the capability development requirements in the business acumen gauge, particularly mindset, strategic alignment, collaborative and decision making. A better understanding of EI and how that works is a really good part of helping someone move forward inside a framework that makes sense. The coaching should challenge people. It's not about walking gently into the night. It should challenge. I mean, awareness, insight, and action are the 3 things we work on. And with the business acumen gauge, what it does is it first challenges the awareness of what that is and what it looks like. And having something that enables people to visualize that, to see it. Often, as many of you know, people are far more visual learners than readers. The visualization of it is a significant benefit. Also, the fact that the assessment was designed without free text. It's based on structured questions and answers, which means that people are much more comfortable. It's objective, it's data-based. And then we've got a number of leadership programs that we've developed, workshops and programs off the business acumen gauge capabilities and the outcome of the assessments we've done over the time. And those workshops are kept short, sharp, and focused. So we don't have a workshop that runs for more than a day. We believe that you need to get your people in and get them back out. As you all know, if you don't use the information that you're exposed to, within the first 4 to 6 weeks, people lose it. So you need to engage them, enthuse them, inform them, and then get them back out to encourage them to use it and develop those competencies and learned behaviours. So that's a very quick overview of our 3-step processes and how we engage with our clients on that.
Thank you, David. So then you've touched a little bit on the business acumen gauge there as part of the individual assessment, but it might be useful for people to hear a little bit more about how that works. I'm going to hand back over to you again to do that.
Okay, so if you go to the next slide for me, please. So this is the model of business acumen. There are 11 capabilities. I will make a point here that when we did the initial research more than a decade ago now, a decade always sounds far more impressive than 10 years, doesn't it? Is when we did the work, we found that there was literally thousands of commentary of articles and comments and references to business acumen. Almost without exception, they were a single item element, if you like. It was one thing they talked about, financial literacy, strategic alignment, et cetera, et cetera. When we did the research, we found that there was, in fact, a number of capabilities or elements that were most commonly quoted, and we distilled that down to these 11 in the work done by Monash over the last 3 years. And I stress that the independence of the researchers, that we identified someone who would do the research, and whilst we paid in part for it, we had no control over the research. It was run by Monash independently of us. And the first phase of the research was for them to identify and validate both the model in its construct and what it said it was describing, and then the assessment, what it said it was assessing. And if it didn't get past that first phase, the rest of the research would not continue. That was the agreement. And I would put to you that many of the assessments that you use, whilst researched, few have got that level of independent research done on them. So the 11 capabilities that we identified, and then in the ongoing research of Monash 10 years later, they found almost the same thing. And in the final literature review they did, they researched something like 93,000 articles. And they came down to less than 10 articles or research papers that researched business acumen. Of that 10, only 4 had more than one element or construct that they looked at. All the rest were a single construct in business acumen. So the model that we've got here starts at mindsets, then foresight, broad scanning, which I mentioned before with this client this week, strategic alignment, collaborative, resource management, systems and processes, decision-making, talent development, duty of care. For those of you in North America, the duty of care is often referred to as stewardship in your area. In Europe, it's known as duty of care, as it is here. And financial literacy, which is actually part A and B. A is what you would call the management day-to-day financial literacy, and B is the more strategic use of capital, etc., elements of financial literacy. So do you want to go on from there, Kate?
I will. Oops. There we go.
Okay, just checking there's no more chat. Okay. So when we designed the model, and we had been accredited and used a vast array of assessment methodologies ourselves prior to this, we went out and talked to a range of people, and we talked to a number of people we had identified as having what we believed was business acumen based on the model we had developed. And what we came up with was a clear view that one of the biggest issues in understanding what is there and what needs to be changed is the first question, what is there? And that means that often we found that a lot of the work being done to develop people and organizations failed to have what we would call a definitive and objective database or starting point. And so we designed the assessment is 2 parts, part A and part B. Part A is actually a set of questions which simply says to the participant and the respondents, it's based on the 360 methodology, how important at this time in this role is this capability? So it's very specific. Doesn't ask how good the person is, how bad they are. Do you think they're doing a good job? It's about the role. And the purpose is, if we don't first understand and agree on what is important in the role at that point in time, then it's pretty hard to use any further data to understand how to help the person and the organization achieve. And so part A is that, and part B, which I'll talk to you in a minute, is about the frequency of behaviors. This first diagram, which comes up in the report, is actually the aggregation of the data on importance and demonstration. And the green is the importance and the orange is demonstration. And what you're looking for here is what are the variances between those things. And you'll see is importance is rated higher here and demonstration in foresight and also in duty of care. The rest of it is fairly closely aligned, but as they say, devil is always in the detail. So if you go to the next one, please, Kate. These are actually from a report of a senior executive de-identified. So whilst graphically it may not be the best representation, this is a cut and paste out of the actual report for a client. This is part A. You'll see in part A that the red is the data for the person. The blue is the data of their direct manager. The orange or yellow is the data from their peer group, and the green is the data from their direct reports. Down the bottom, you'll see that there's actually the data in its raw form, so to speak. I think we're having some technical difficulties. I think there's a record commenting. So this is the importance data, and this graph obviously shows why we think this is important. If you look at this, as my dear mother would have said, this looks a little bit higgledy-piggledy, so that if you're looking for what's the commonality, what do those respondent groups agree is important in the role, you'll see that there's not a lot of alignment here. And in fact, the person whose data is shown in the red has rated foresight, broad scanning, and strategic alignment as being most important in the role, whereas not been rated at that level by anyone else. And also interesting, systems and processes and decision making is for this person the highest. If you go around, you'll see that duty of care and financial literacy and mindsets, they've rated at a midpoint, and yet the boss, the peers, and direct reports have pretty much all rated at higher, which, you know, tells you that there's a bit of a difference here. Also, if you go back one, you'll see that the boss doesn't rate talent development very high, but everyone else agrees it's a midpoint. So what we've got here is a broader spread of opinion, view, perspective of what's important in the role. So that's the first step. How do we have those discussions? How do we identify why that is so? Because the purpose of business acumen is for a role and the person in it to help achieve the organization's strategy. That's what business acumen is. And I'll just jump in at this point and say, and when our last webinar, someone said, this is really important if you're trying to make profit. I might hand back to Kate on that point just for a second for her view on that.
Mm-hmm. Yes, it is obviously very important. I think when we think about how we get our people and our leadership teams working in unison, one of the things that we often miss out on is what is important in the role. And I've got I think a good example of this is about 6 years ago now, I was working in an organisation. We were going through a big merger, and it was a merger of equals on paper. But we had two leadership teams that needed to come together, and we did very comprehensive assessments. We looked at past performance. We looked at what we thought was required for the business, for the merged business going forward, and we made decisions on who we put into our key roles based on that. With hindsight and with now my knowledge of business acumen, what we didn't do was really look at how each of those roles would help drive the strategic objectives of the new organisation. And unsurprisingly, now with this hindsight, what happened was 50% of those roles, or those individuals in those roles, failed because we hadn't set them up for success, because we had not looked at what was actually truly really required in that role, despite the fact that we had done what we had felt at the time was really comprehensive assessments on those individuals. And, you know, obviously in a lot of transactions and a lot of M&A, you do lose people. But my belief is if we had have been much clearer on what those roles needed and how they would drive that organisational success in going into the merged business, we would not have seen that turnover. And, you know, we all have experienced if turnover at leadership means turnover through the business, which is not what you want during a big transaction. So that was a really interesting learning for me and a really interesting experience. But it really highlights the importance of understanding what is required in the role at the time.
Okay.
I'm going to move on to the next slide, David, just for time, if that's okay.
Okay.
Oops. I'm having troubles. This happened the other day with me while I was presenting. It wasn't working.
Okay. The point I'll just make is talking about profit. Is business acumen is required in any organisation. It's not just about making profit. It's about making sure the organisation can achieve its strategic goals. As I often say, not-for-profits are also not for loss, although that's sometimes lost in the drive for the purpose and the mission. So whether you're in a government organisation, a listed organisation, a PE-backed organisation, or a not-for-profit, you need business acumen. It's about achieving the purposes of the business. That's what business acumen is about. This is the same person. This is part B. In part B, the same people are asked questions in each capability. There's 3 to 5 questions in each capability in this section. How frequently do you see this person demonstrate this behaviour? So in collaborative, one of the questions is this person politically astute? Okay. In mindsets, there's 6 mindsets that they're asked about: analytical mindset, creative mindset, etc. And what you've got here is a very different outcome in the data, where you can see that there's a high alignment of pattern, although the ratings are a bit lower. Interesting, this person has rated themselves a bit higher in their behaviours, in mindset and foresight, strategic alignment. Collaborative, interestingly, is much higher, their view of what they're doing as distinct from everyone else. And then on the other half, the left-hand side, as you look at it of the graph, there's a fair bit of alignment in the majority. I might add that this person's direct manager had only been managing them for 3 months at the time. So the pattern of the manager is similar, although the rate of frequency is lower, which makes sense. But if you can go back to the last slide, Kate, for a second, you'll see again this much higher degree of misalignment between what's important in the role. If we go back to a demonstration, the person is quite consistent and people are having a consistent experience. So if we can get the alignment of what's important in the role right, this person is already demonstrating their ability to be consistent in how they then deliver those capabilities to all that they deal with. Therein lays the opportunity for the coaching and development.
Lovely segue. Thank you, David. So one of the key tools we have in our toolkit is our leadership coaching, our business leadership coaching, and being able to develop business acumen through kind of real-time advisory. And that might be in-house coaching, it might be external coaching. And I imagine many of you are familiar with coaching on this call. So as David mentioned, I won't tell you what it's about and how to do it. But the fact with the BAG that you can be much more targeted. Specifically, if we have a really good understanding of what it requires for somebody to be successful in their role and where they may not be being successful, beyond just I need to improve my presentation skills or I'm trying to think of some common ones that I've got at the moment. I'm unclear on what my next role is, etc. If we can use the BAG or a more complex understanding of business acumen, what it does is enable us to really target and get really specific about the areas that need development and coaching, and really working with that individual on the areas that will really make a difference to what they're trying to achieve. So I think that is really important. Sorry, David, you were about to say something again.
Sorry, I was just going to say that we've talked about experience as part of the process of development, and obviously experience is linked heavily to coaching and programs. In the paper and in the earlier research, early in the Monash research and also in the final paper, they're very specific around the fact that experience in on of itself is not the answer. And simply put, it's the question around relevant experience that's targeted for a specified outcome, supported and measured, is what they're talking about. And the problem is that many people have assumptions around experience. And as someone I used to work with used to say, I'll be talking about 10 years experience or 1 year's experience 10 times. And so experience, if you look at learning agility or curiosity, experience is about a targeted approach to a form of experiences that the person should be able to learn and develop from, not just saying I've done it for 3 years. And in the research, that's a significant part of the issue around business acumen and the assumptions made around it. If I've been a head of sales for 5 years, I must be much better than someone who's been doing it for a year. Not so.
Yeah. I think where that's really come to the fore in some work that I've done, David, is, we've been living through a global pandemic for the last 2 years as number one, but as the world really pushes into digitalisation and data, the fourth industrial revolution, as we might call it, the need for our leaders to have a different skill set and to be able to problem solve in the moment with issues that didn't even exist 2 years ago, let alone 50 years ago, really highlights the need for our leaders today, and actually anybody today, to be able to really be adaptable and respond differently. And I think the nuances and the detail of the capabilities of the Business Acumen Gauge enable you to prepare for that a bit more. If people go through a structured program or experience where they are specifically developing things that are relevant to the role at the time that we know are critical in Business Acumen, we're giving our people a better toolkit to be able to draw on as they have to adapt and change and learn in the moment. What's required of us as human beings in workplaces now is very different, and so it requires something different. It's just my 2 cents on that.
Yes, a great comment here. Yes, time on task doesn't necessarily equal work savvy. There you go. That's the phrase. If you don't mind, I'll take that and use that in future presentations. That's very well said.
Spot on. So given the time, I might quickly, we've sort of touched on leadership programs and the fact that we can really focus on very specific areas to uplift the Business Acumen capabilities. David, is there anything that you want to touch on more in this area that we haven't touched on yet?
I think there's two that, well, all of them obviously, but very quickly. The two that really stand out here, I think, are strategic mindset and the executive presence, which I'll ask you to talk to briefly. But in a strategic mindset, we've developed a one-day workshop which can be delivered online, but we limit it to normally 15 or 16 people. And we take the first 4 capabilities, mindsets, foresight, broad scanning, and strategic alignment, and we go through those with the people, and then we introduce them to a number of strategic models, force by forces, SWOT analysis, PESTEL. And then in the second half of the day, using the outcomes of those working groups, we get them to use design thinking and look at how they can approach issues in their workplace that can have an outcome. We've run this both in North America and in Australasia, and in every single case in the workshop, there's been at least 3 projects have come out of it for the organisation from a group of 16 people. That's not bad. And at least one normally has been an issue that's been around for a while, but they couldn't quite work out how to grab hold of it and move it forward. And the other 2 are things or issues that people have been thinking about for a while, but just didn't know how to bring it to the table and get the interest in it. And in every case, those projects have gone on to some success in the organisations to address outcomes that have helped achieve strategic goals. I raise that because it's about bringing to the table how people can actually learn, develop and apply business acumen, and often for many people in those workshops, they're surprised at their capability to do that when given the opportunity. You want to talk briefly about executive presence and influence?
Yeah, so executive presence and influence is also another day-long workshop that we have done across continents, and it's interactive, and we ask people to bring in specific challenges or activities or needs from their day-to-day work that need kind of immediate addressing immediately. And this interactive workshop really focuses on the area of mindset, strategic alignment, collaborative and decision-making specifically. But what we do is we work with, in the moment, developing specific skills that we know will uplift and help in these areas. And the feedback that we've had from one that we ran recently was within the next day, people were experiencing their leaders in a different way in terms of the way that they were presenting them, the way they were positioning things with them, and the way that they were engaging with them to get things done. So obviously, as a facilitator, that's a really nice thing to hear, because our goal is to change behaviour. But what was really remarkable, I think, is the speed at which that happened. And we know that it's important for things to be sticky in terms of behaviour change. They have to have a fairly immediate impact. and our executive presence and influence workshops did that through targeting very specifically those areas from a business acumen point of view. So I'm going to quickly move on to David, unless there's anything else you want to say about that.
It's okay.
And wrap up our portion of this before we hand over to questions, if there is any. But I think in summary, what is business acumen? You know, we now have a much clearer definition, and it is the capability to both know and to demonstrate the key attributes of your role or somebody else's role that align to the strategy and allow you to succeed in running your business. So that is really important, and I'm just going to reiterate it again, to both know and to demonstrate the key attributes in the role that align to strategy in order for you to succeed for your business. So it's very targeted and very specific. So with that, I'm just going to draw a line under our presentation and say thank you very much for listening, and thank you for participating on the chat. And I will hand it back over if anybody else has got any questions they'd like to ask now. Please do so.
Hi there, this is Joseph Wyckoff.
Hi, Joseph.
I am, for those of you who know, I'm also a community moderator for Inspiring Leadership. I'm just popping in here because I think it'll be faster than my typing. I just wanted to ask both of you, the Business Acumen Gauge seems very targeted, very specific to an individual, to a role, and to a time. It also seems like it's got the possibility for a great function. Can you talk more about dealing with business acumen with a team? Is there a way to do assessment of business acumen within a working group, as a group?
Yep, absolutely. So we have the ability to produce team reports, which we do. So you have each person assessed. They have their individual report, and then we can have a team report, and the team can be identified by you. It's not set to any particular level or whatever. You just tell us what the group is you want to call the team. Before we run the assessments, we do the individual assessments, then we aggregate the data up, and that gives you the common drivers, misalignments, opportunities. We've done it in a range of environments with great success, from a post M&A of 5 businesses into a listed company, where the 5 businesses were not operating, but they had each of the founders still running them. So, you know, all the same but very different. Through to a number of other organisations where they've had executive teams or specified teams across role types in different countries, where they've taken the data and aggregated it up. Classically, I would say that you're best to have between 5 to 8 people in a team for a report like that. After that, you start to get a bit of smoothing, but certainly it gives you the opportunity to address, find common trends and drivers, so you can have both a group approach, which is a much bigger bang for your buck, and also then identify individual needs of development underneath that.
Yeah, it's a great question. Thanks, Joseph. And where I've seen it work, as David has talked to, is when there is a team that maybe needs to get to confidence really quickly, so through an M&A, or is perhaps not performing where you would hope that they would be, and to get a real sense of what they need to focus on individually and together to drive that high performance to deliver the strategy. So it certainly is really good in a team environment. Thanks.
Excellent. Thank you both for that.
Anyone else?
No? Okay. Might I just add my thanks to Kate for being part of this today, and also for those who watch it in the future. We're very happy to supply the final report. We'll actually see, well, Joseph, I think, does have it. If not, we'll make sure he does. And if anyone would like to have it, we're very happy to distribute it and respond to any questions or comments you've got from that at a later time.
And this is Zach just jumping in for a second. David or Kate, do you have a way that anyone can reach out to you or or the company in directly?
Sure.
LinkedIn for me.
Yeah, either LinkedIn or my email is dryan, DRYAN, at aceevolve, ACEEVOLVE.com.
Excellent. Thank you so much. And thank you guys for coming in. Fascinating to learn about this new tool. And as just a lover of graphs, it's so fantastic to just be able to see what's going on within the organization and the team, with the colors and the spider web there. It's wonderful wonderful tool, I think.
Thank you.
Thank you. And so with that, we'll close out. I hope everyone's having good holidays and moves. Everyone's seems to be moving these days. So Kate, get settled in, and thank you, David. Thank you all for your time. Thanks, everyone.
Thank
Take
you.
care. Bye.